my God, there's a lot happening here. There's a lot happening in the room. Hi, everybody on Zoom. Hi. Okay, so yeah, I've been living in terror.
Oh.
What did you think of the brutalist?
Until I read Tomas's piece, I liked it. How's that for
I haven't
being
seen it
political?
because I want to see the movie first. I'm seeing it next week.
And now I don't like it anymore.
Really?
How about nobody wants this?
It's a little bit more complicated, but yes.
Of the rabbi.
Hi, everybody. Okay. All right, let me make another reminder. Okay, what am I going to say? I'm going to say quiet because, why? Hi. Shabbat shalom. Shabbat shalom. Okay, everything in the room can be heard on Zoom, and we're going to try to have one class. Okay, I see people. Oh, thank you so much.
Zoom moderator here, I will say that we want to hear the things you say when you say them. So during discussion, make sure you move towards one of the mics so the people over Zoom can hear you.
That's fine. So if you can't hear, I'm right near a mic. If you can't hear me, just tell me. And if you can't hear other people, just say so, okay? Okay, so wait, how do I get the gallery view up here? Wait. What's this? Maybe this? This? No. Okay. Oh, I just saw view. Okay, view. Sorry, everybody. Just give us a minute. Okay. There we go. Much better. Whatever this is, later for you. Cancel for you. Okay. Okay. Well, breathe, arrive, Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom, everybody in the room, on Zoom. Feel free, Ezra, if you want to sit at the table, if you want to hang out back there, that's fine too. Okay, so let me start with a little bit of a confession. This week, Safaria, that's how I create my source sheets, changed their whole editing system. And I did not have time or capacity to figure it out. So what I did is I took last year's sheet and added some new things. So if you remember from last year, there's a good reason. I will confess now instead of being outed in the middle. How's that?
There's no way I'm going to remember.
There's no way you can remember. Once we're studying, if anyone remembers, let me know. Because you remember that it was memorable. And if you didn't remember, uh-oh. Okay, that's my opening gambit. Also, you could see, like, I have no idea how this new editor works. So it doesn't look as good as usual, I think. Hello, Shabbat Shalom. But I will spend time this week, God willing, figuring it out. God willing.
This looks great.
This looks great?
Yeah, it's got little boxes.
It looks better.
Yeah.
Boxes, okay.
Good font.
Good fonts. All right, enough. Now we're going to focus on Torah, and we're going to start with the Torah blessing, or the blessing of Torah. If you could screen share that, Caroline, please. And thank you, Caroline, for all your back-end work. You can unmute. Let's all say this together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asot
Torah.
Amen, amen. And my kavanah for this session is that the study of Torah should give us some strength to face the world that we're in. Ooh, everyone disappeared. Is there a reason for that? Okay, Zoom, let's go like this. See if they come back. Yes. Excellent. Okay, so today I want to kind of dip into Mishpatim. And Mishpatim is a really interesting kind of pivotal parsha. And I talked about this a little bit last night. So what happens in Mishpatim is narrative ends, law begins. It can be kind of disappointed. You know, it's like after the ecstasy, the laundry. So what is this move to law after all this, like wonderful, engaging, fascinating, disturbing story, right? No story here. There is a scene at the end that, introduces story again, but it's minor in terms of the scope of the parsha, so we're not going to deal with that today. But there's this move to endless law. And what I want to do is look at the opening of the parsha and consider why the parsha would open with a specific law about slavery, or having slaves. And then look at another piece that sort of talks a little bit about, the values behind many of the laws. Okay, ready? I'm going to share my screen. Oh, wait, here we go. I call it, wait, oh, it's black over there. Why is that? The screen sharing is paused. Okay, let's try this again. Okay.
Is the document open?
Why does it say your screen sharing is paused? Does anyone know?
Is your document open on the screen?
Is the document open?
Yeah, before you share, is your document?
Yes, the document's open. Do I have any techies here that can help? Okay, so,
You want me to get Victor?
As
No.
you're the youngest.
I was assuming someone was going to say that.
Perhaps
only-
put Caroline in charge of the screen sharing for now?
oh, just give me a minute. Just give us a minute.
You're the young person.
You could stop the sharing.
Yeah.
And then,
That's so cool.
here, hold on. Okay, this doesn't work. We'll ask Caroline to share. Give me 1 minute. Okay, so here's the document. Okay, I did before. Okay.
Oh, no, go back.
Oh, go back. Stop share. Okay, what did I do wrong? Yeah, click
So
it.
you just click at one
Look at one.
and then hit share.
Ah, and that makes a difference?
And then.
No. Okay, we're just gonna ask Caroline to do it. Thank you so much. And now I feel better that Ezra couldn't do it. Feel not quite as incompetent here. Okay, Caroline, please share. But thank you, Ezra, for trying. I don't understand the ways of sharing, I truly don't. Okay, so I called it when you acquire a Hebrew slave coming down from Sinai with a crash. 2 mishpatim. Go up a little bit, Caroline. The first source looks, no. Up. Yes, thank you. Okay. This is how the Parsha starts, and there's a gorgeous Rashi on this. Ve'ele hamishpatim asher tasim lefnehem, and these are the rules that you shall set before them. So this is how the Parsha starts. Now remember, last week we were at Sinai, right? And there were some rules, but it was basically the story of Sinai and the Israelites standing there and their reaction, which was basically one of terror. And remember there that the people say to Moshe, don't let God speak to us anymore, right? They couldn't tolerate hearing the intensity of God's voice. And Moshe and God kind of agreed, because through the rest of the Torah, Moshe is the intermediary, right? God no longer speaks to them directly because they can't take it, right? So God is actually paying attention to the capacity, which is kind of amazing. So here's what Rashi says on this first verse. And it's all about pedagogy. Asher tasim lifnehem. Amar lo hakadosh baruch hu Moshe. So God, the holy, blessed one be they, said to Moshe, Lo ta'aleh al da'atcha lomar. Don't think to say, Eshne lahem haperek halacha bet o gimel pamim, that I'll teach them, this chapter or this law two or three times. Ad shetehei stra b'pihem kimishnata. Until it's sort of all established and they know it by heart. Ve'eni matriach atzmi lahavinam ta'ameh hadavar uperusho. And I don't bother myself to make sure they understand things and its explanation. In other words, don't just teach it to them by rote. Make sure they understand. Ne'amar asher tasim lifnehem. For this reason it is said, as you shall place it before them, shulchan ha'aruch, like a spread table, muchan le'echol lifnei ha'adam, like a spread table before a person with everything ready for eating. So this is a way of saying, as we would say in our times, making things accessible, right? Not just learning something by rote and having no understanding of what you're doing, why you're doing it, why you're saying it, but actually understanding what you're doing, right? And making it completely accessible, right? So it's very different than the Sinai experience where the people are like, it's like, here's this beautiful table laid out for me and I'm ready to partake. And what an interesting image for law, having a set table, right? And in fact, the major law code, the Shulchan Aruch, right, is named for this image.
Sounds like a buffet, though.
It sounds like a buffet.
You could pick and choose what you want.
Ooh.
Yeah, that's what they call a cafeteria cafe.
Sounds like a buffet. You can pick and choose. I don't think that's the intent, but I understand why you would say that. Okay, so now the next verse, or the next passage. So here we are. We're supposed to be sitting at this spread table, and suddenly we learn this law about slavery, which, given the Israelite experience and given our reading of the Torah, is pretty disturbing, right? Ki tikneh eved ivri sheish shanim ya'avod, ubashvi'it yitzeh l'chofshi chinam. You acquire a Hebrew slave, he shall serve 6 years. In the 7th year, he shall go free without payment. So let's just look at this for a minute. So already encoded in this verse are the archetypal numbers 6 and 7, right? Which means something. And it mirrors the principle of Shabbat, that there's a kind of, 6 days of labor, and the 7th day there's, being set free, right? For shleimut, for wholeness, for rest, for Shabbat, like this principle of stopping. And he shall go free in that 7th year, for free, not having to pay anything for his freedom. Okay? So how does this sit with you after their experience in Egypt? Like, what's going on here? Let's read a little bit more. I'm going to ask that question both of people in the room and on Zoom. In begafo yavo, begafo yetzeh. So if he came only himself or only with his own body, he shall leave, by himself. In Bali Shahu, the Yatzah Ishto Ima. But he was married when he came in, his wife should go with him. But, verse 4, Im Adonavi ten lo isho, but if his master gave him a wife, the Yaldalo Bonim Ubanot, and he had sons and daughters, sons or daughters, or the wife, gave birth to sons and daughters for him, the Yiladeha Tihye Adoneha. So his children should be for the master. Sorry, I'm looking for. Where's the continuation?
It got cut off.
It got cut off? Not here. Okay.
We believe it.
Okay, so if his master gave him a wife, and she was born him children, the wife and her children shall belong to the master, and he shall leave alone. 5. Ve'im amor yomar ha'eved, hati et adoni, et ishti et banai. But if the slave says, I love my master and my wife and my children, lo etzeh chofshi, I will not go out. And what happens then in verse 6? V'higisho Adonav el Elohim. So his master takes him to the Lord, meaning I guess the local shrine. V'higisho el Hadela, and he approaches the door, O el Hamuzah, or the door post. Viratsa Adonav et ozno. And his master will pierce his ear like to the doorpost with an awl, the martseya, the avadola olam, and he'll be a slave for him. You know, for some reason, on some of these it's cut off, and on some of these it's not. So my apologies for that. I think I have the next source. Is the next source Leviticus?
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. So let's stop here for a minute and ask, what meaning do you think this has in terms of its placement here? Right? Ki tikneh eved ivri, sheish shanim yavod, u'b'shvi'i yetze l'chofshi chinam. Right? When you acquire a Hebrew slave. What is this doing here? And what is this saying to these just freed slaves? I'm going to take 2 or 3 quick ideas. Elliot.
Yeah, so this is the first law.
This is the first law.
The first one. So it's
This is the first of the mishpatim
Right.
in this parsha. Yes.
so it's significant in being first, right?
Yes. Correct.
And so I think what God is saying is, don't forget, okay, that you were slaves, and keep that in mind, okay, when and if you should acquire a slave, don't forget that you were slaves.
So the first principle is release.
Yes,
Don't forget you were slaves.
right,
And don't get confused. Right? I'm sorry. You finish your. Yeah.
no, but that don't be Pharaoh.
Don't be Pharaoh. Exactly. So the very first law is telling the Israelites, don't be like Pharaoh. The very first, hold on 1 second. The very first law is about setting a slave free.
Free.
Okay. Tomas, do you have a quick thing
I was
before
just
Nikki
saying,
goes?
why isn't it don't have slaves at all?
So that's a great question. Why is it don't have slaves at all? Okay, so I'm going to address that in a few minutes. Ellie, do you want to finish? And then Nikki.
You're gonna answer Tomas, but
No, I am in a few minutes.
yeah.
Do you want to answer, Tomas?
Well, I think
I would love it
that-
if you did.
Yeah, go ahead, Elliot.
I think that there may have been good reasons why some wanted to be or had to be slaves.
Yeah, say, what are those good reasons? Go
Well,
ahead.
if they were poor. If they
This is indentured servitude.
Right, they
A
had no-
poor family cannot sustain itself. So what do? Right? They indenture one of their children to another family, and that's how they sustain themselves. So there was an institution of indentured servitude, and this law comes to limit that.
Right.
Okay. Right? You said right? Okay. So let me just get a line.
I haven't said anything.
Wait, but I have more to say to you about that, but I'm gonna hold on. Hold on, everybody. Okay, I'm gonna say the lineup. Nikki, Wendy, Richard, Jay, Andrea, and then I'm gonna wait, unless Jeremy, are you raising your hand?
No.
Okay. Okay, I'm gonna ask everybody for quick comments so we can get some more text under our belt, so to speak.
Who are these slaves?
Who are these slaves? There are other Hebrews. So we're not talking about Canaanite slaves. There's a whole other disturbing kettle of fish. So I'm not going to address that. There are other Hebrews. This is a Hebrew slave or a Hebrew indentured servant. But that word eved, right, which is the same word for what the Israelites were in Egypt, is being used here. Good question. Thank you. Okay, Wendy.
So these were what they call Eved Ivri.
These were Eved Ivri, Hebrew slaves.
Eved Ivri, as opposed to just.
I'm sorry, Wendy, could you potentially move more forward to the mic, please? Thank you.
Wendy, sit next to Elliot, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
These were Eved Ivri, as opposed to just Eved, slaves. And these people became kind of slaves of their own free will.
Right, we already said that about indentured servitude.
They owed money or whatever, they couldn't sustain themselves, and there was a limit. The
Correct.
limit was, the 6 years and the 7th year they would go free, as opposed to a non-Hebrew slave, which was a whole nother kettle of fish. And
As I said, yes.
And that they became indentured servants of their own free will, and there was a limit.
Okay, excellent.
To how long they could
I want
do
to
it.
question their own free will, because if a child is being sold by their family into indentured servitude, I'm not sure that's free will or not. So we can imagine different scenarios around that. Andrea, and then Richard, and then I'm closing things until the next round. I'm sorry, Oswaldo, okay? Oh, you know what? You have to talk near a speaker, near a microphone.
It strikes me that it's not trying to hold this extreme ideal where nobody would be indentured and everyone would have enough money, but it is saying, here's our reality, but you have to do a little more. It's like trying to push us to move to the next.
So, excellent. So there's a principle in terms of drug addiction, and I don't know a lot about this, I'm sure people know more than me, called harm reduction. So it's acknowledging that person is going to be addicted, and they're not willing yet to give up that addiction. So given that situation, how do we reduce harm? So I heard an incredible story about this on This American Life, where there are people on standby with people who take a drug that could be laced with fentanyl. And they stay on Zoom or FaceTime or whatever it is, this person, that's their volunteer job to do that, to see if they remain alive, or to see if they pass out. And if they pass out, then they call 911. And the myriad of lives are saved in this way. So this is harm reduction, exactly. So this is, okay, you're gonna do that. And it's very hard to do that in one's life, to acknowledge okay, I'm doing this. Right? Instead of okay, I'm going to stop this entirely. I love chocolate. I'm not going to stop it. Maybe I can eat a little bit less, or healthy chocolate. What's the harm reduction? Maybe I can say a bracha over it. Maybe I can make it a little holy. Right? It's the Torah of chocolate addiction. Okay, Richard.
There's something very odd about these passages, because if the slave wishes to stay with its master, you take an awl and you nail the lobe of the ear to the doorpost. Whoa. Doorposts have an enormous significance in the whole Exodus story and in contemporary life, in the placing of the mezuzah on the doorpost of your house. That's a very mixed message. It's partly I am becoming free, and it's partly I'm nailing myself to the doorpost. Whoa. There's got to be a story there that I don't understand.
So there's a midrash about this that I'm going to kind of misquote. So if anyone knows it better than me, please help me out. And it's an extraordinary midrash. The midrash says that the ear that didn't hear the message of freedom, right, at Sinai or in Egypt, or when the doorposts were painted with blood so that the Israelite lives were spared, that same ear that didn't hear the message of freedom, that ear is going to be nailed to the doorpost.
Metaphor.
It's a metaphor. That's right. Thank you. Richard, do you want to say anything? How does that land?
Um, Middly. The message is still, to me, potentially contradictory. It's a double message of both nailing, which is locking, putting two things together in a way which normally you can't pull them apart, and also a symbol, as I've said, of freedom. It's I get the midrash. It makes some sense, but there's another way of reading the line. It's very messy to me, anyway.
Okay, I'm not totally getting the contradiction because it's the perfect symbol of unfreedom and not hearing the message of freedom. So I'm not totally getting what you're hearing here.
Because the doorpost itself, that is being nailed to freedom, is another way of reading that line.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you. Asher Chaim.
No, just noting that Jay had raised a physical hand and you'd noticed him before, but he didn't raise the mechanical hand.
I forgot. I'm so sorry. I did. Is that what you wanted to tell me? Okay. Jay.
Oh, well, thank you. For some reason, I can't get access to that icon. You know what? Call on me if you ever really want to discuss own free will or the distinction between Hebrew and non-Hebrew slaves. So I'll pass for now.
Okay. Thank you, Jay.
Thank you,
Okay,
Rabbi Asher Chaim.
Let me say one more thing about this passage, which I think, and this goes back to Eliot's opening point, that I think for just freed slaves to be masters can be very confusing. But number one, the Torah is now addressing these just freed slaves as masters, right? They're suddenly empowered. When you acquire for yourself a Hebrew slave, they're in a completely different position. And when the tables are turned and the roles are reversed, it's so seductive to forget that you're a slave, as Eliot said. But remember, master is not ultimately your identity. Pharaoh is not ultimately your identity. Set that person free after 6 years. I think it's really profound. And it's also profound in terms of like human psychology and how we understand ourselves as masters, as slaves, as in power, as not in power, and getting very confused in the world, having a lot of money and thinking you own the world. Not sure about that. That can change on a dime, right?
Yeah, it's also a warning. This could happen again. What happened to you in Egypt, this can happen again. You could end up as a slave.
You can end up as a slave, right? So it's inviting us to have a freedom of persona, which is the greatest freedom of all.
Those 7 years, they map onto that Jubilee cycle.
It is complicated. In Deuteronomy, they kind of map on, they're taught again. We're going to look at this a little bit during services, but it's not clear if they map onto it exactly, or if each slave has their own cycle. Okay, Oswaldo, poor Oswaldo's been waiting, so I'm calling Oswaldo, and then Amy, and then I'm going to go on, and Brenda, I'm going to ask you to wait a little bit. Okay.
So I'm just going to bring a very quasi-personal experience.
Uh-huh.
I love what you said. This is like establishment of a law. My grandmother was a soul for food.
Wait, your grandmother what?
I'm sorry, can you move closer to the mic, please? Sorry.
Well, we can't hear you as well. Now I can't even hear him.
So I loved what you said about this being against the law, because when you have a tradition where even if it's a danger, even if it's a quasi-slavery, what this is about, if you don't have laws or regulations to stop it, it just continues on for generations. So, and on a personal level, I know in South America, where I'm from, where it's just a tradition, it just continues on, and the relationship is really a slave, even though you're sort of like a labor quasi-slave. It just continues on. There's no regulation.
Wait, what were you saying about your grandmother?
Well, my grandmother was given up as a child, as a baby, was given away as a...
Your grandmother was given away as an endangered. Wait, can we just stop here for a minute? Because that is unbelievable. Your grandmother was basically an indentured servant.
Right, just like this situation.
And was sold into slavery as a child?
Right.
In what country?
In Ecuador. And that's, for generations, it's not just my family, it's just like a whole group of people. And my point is, it's like there's no regulation, it's a tradition, it just passes on. And if you don't have these rules, right, and when I find
Nothing interrupts it, yes.
nothing interrupts it, it
Right.
just
Right.
passes on to the next generation. And that's what I like
Right.
about this.
Breaks the cycle.
It breaks,
Breaks the
it forces to break the
Thank-
cycle
Yeah.
by law.
Yeah, thank you,
Okay.
thank you, Oswaldo. So let me just say one more thing about that, I know I called on Amy, which is, so some of the Torah has really disturbing laws like this one, because it's about the institution of slavery that you want it to just go away. But what it does, and we're going to see later during services, what happens between Exodus and Deuteronomy is that the laws have been humanized. So the Torah is not only about content, it's about trajectory. In other words, like you might want to address something horrible, but you can't abolish it for whatever reason, as Andrea was saying, but you put into motion a different kind of process so that you see over time things going in the direction that they should be going into. Does that make sense? No.
I think that ties with testing with Nahum.
Okay.
That it has the capability of being studied and redefined over time.
Beautiful. So Alan's introducing the notion of redefining. So in other words, let's say something, okay, let me give a specific example. I'm going to go back to addiction. So you can't abolish, for whatever reason, the addiction in a person's life, in a given person's life. But what you can do is put into process something that may over time lead them in that direction. You can start putting supports in their life. You can put, elements of harm reduction. You can work on their relationships. You can give them therapy. You can do a lot of things so that over time things shift. So that's what's happening here between Exodus and Deuteronomy. Things have shifted, even though slavery itself or indentured servitude has not been abolished. Okay, I'm going to go on and do some text. Here we go.
Can I just quickly ask, was there a time when it was formally abolished that we recognize as a time in history where this was no longer?
In the scope of the Torah itself, no, and otherwise I don't know.
But people don't practice it now that are religious Jews unless they do. No. Okay,
Not
so there's a
allowed
time,
by
you're not allowed to
civil
by
law.
civil law. Okay.
No, thank God, no. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm going to go on. I'm sorry. Caroline, could you do this differently? Could you do one page at a time instead of seeing 2 pages at once? Single page. Thank you. Okay, great. Okay, so I want to dive a little bit into when you acquire a Hebrew slave. So that word, kitikneh, right, is also used for a man acquiring a wife. Interesting. And here I'm reading from Aviva Richman, a teacher at Hadar. No, stay right there. Thank you. Don't move.
So she's trying to get that.
What's she trying to do? Oh, I see. For some reason, it's not on this one. Here, Alan, can you change it? Thank you. Okay. At Hamas, could you read in biblical Hebrew?
Yes.
Yeah, they're not numbered because of this.
I'm trying to find where.
Here, yeah.
Right here in biblical Hebrew.
Yeah.
In biblical Hebrew, the root that.
So the root kene, nun hey,
can mean to acquire, but it can also mean to create, signaling a creation that comes through acquisition. God's acquisition of the Hebrew slaves demonstrates how to acquire someone in a position of subjugation so that they become free and can create themselves anew. The language of redemption as acquiring Israel rings with the overtones of the Song of the Sea, where we describe ourselves as
Amzu Kaniti.
Kanita, the people you acquired. Like a rebirth, coming through the waters of the sea into God's acquisition was a moment of creating ourselves as a new people.
So it's a verb that can go in many different directions, and we're going to see some of the directions right now. So Genesis 4:1. Adam yada et Chava ishto v'tahar v'teled et Cain v'tomar Haniti ish et Adonai. So now the human, the first human, Adam, knew his wife Eve. She gave birth. She got pregnant and she gave birth to Cain, who is actually the son that is named for acquisition. And she said, I have gained or I've acquired a person with Adonai. Okay, so that's one understanding of that root. Kuf nun he. Next. Wait a second. Jeremy, our Hebrew expert here, do you want to say anything about that root?
No. I mean, it reminds me of a different word, pidyon, which is when you also redeem by paying. That's not this word.
Pidyon haben, liftot, to redeem the firstborn son.
Which is the same concept.
Which is the same concept.
As I read it.
In terms of setting free the slave after 6 years, you're saying?
No, I'm saying here where it says.
Because it seems like the opposite of to redeem.
It says how to acquire someone in a position of subjugation so that they become free.
Yes.
Okay, I think that the act of acquiring is like the pidyon, whereby by doing so you're declaring a freedom.
Got it.
That's how I read this.
Interesting. Okay. All right. So again, oh wait, this one is yours.
Otherwise, it doesn't make sense to me, because if you buy somebody and they're still a slave, it's kind of a fallacy.
Yes.
That's
That's interesting. So you're saying in a way that the verb itself, the fluidity of the verb itself leads to our imagining that person's freedom.
That's the only way I can read this.
That's deep.
That's very deep. That's very deep. I love it. Okay. If you can go down, Caroline, thank you. Okay. So here,
I couldn't purchase a Hebrew slave. You could only purchase a non-Hebrew slave.
we're going to go on. We're going to go. Ki tikneh eved ivri implies acquisition through some kind of purchase. That's the pshat, I think.
Right.
Maybe it's to the slave. Maybe the payment is to the person.
Maybe. We're going to go on. Okay, so this verse, I don't know why the source of the verse is missing. Oh, I know where it's in the Song of the Sea. Tipol alehen emata v'pachad bigdol zroacha yidmu ke'evan ad yavor amcha Adonai ad yavor am zu kanita. So terror and dread, this is what Aviva Richmond had just quoted. Terror and dread descend upon them through the might of your arm. They are still as stone, meaning the Egyptians. Till your people cross over, Adonai, till your people cross, whom you have ransomed, whom you have acquired, or whom you have set free. Yeah, so that double meaning is really interesting. When God acquires, then you're set free.
Sorry, just one more thing.
Yeah.
In the Amida, God is koneh.
I'm so sorry. Could you please go closer to the mic? Thank you.
Reference to the silent meditation, the Amida, that says koneh hakol zocher chasdei avot. God acquires everything.
Yeah. Yeah, God is the great acquirer. Okay, so let's go to the next source. Go down. Okay, wait, too much. Go up a little bit. Thank you. Okay, right there. Okay, I don't know why where the source is from is gone. What does it say, Leviticus?
Yeah.
Okay, fine. It's Leviticus. Fine. Okay. So again, kanita. So actually, this is not about kanita. This is about a related concept. So let's look at this. Jeremy, do you feel like reading this?
Sure.
Oh, you can't read it on your page?
ויצא ממך הוא ובניו עמו, ושב אל משפחתו ואל אחוזת אבותיו ישוב. כי עבדי הם אשר הוצאתי אותם מארץ מצרים, לא ימכרו ממכרת עבד, לא תרדה בו בפרך ויראת מאלוהיך.
So this describes the Jubilee year, and this is the way that God describes the Israelites. They are my servants, right? They are my servants, Avadai. So what you were to Pharaoh, now you are to God. So when that root is used in Exodus in terms of Pharaoh, it's translated as slaves. And here it's translated as servants, that we become God's servants, even though it's exactly the same root. So why did God free us from the land of Egypt? That they may not give themselves over into slavery or servitude. Mimkeret aved. Right? So the Jubilee year is that year to establish freedom for all and equality for all. Okay. I want to do one more thing with you, Shmot Rabbah, and then I'll open things up. I see a lot of people want to say
Wait, so the Jubilee, it nullifies even that La'olam, when that servant who chooses to stay and has his ear pierced, and it says...
That's a good question. That's a good question.
Isn't that for life?
I presume, but then there's a contradiction there. Yeah, I have to look that up. I don't know. That's an like, yeah. What happens to the slave who wants to stay with their master forever? Okay, let's look at Shmot Rabbah for a minute. So this is the Midrash on Exodus. Bo or kama mishubachat parasha zos. Come and see how excellent this portion is. Kama parshiyot ba. Isn't that?
If I just say so myself.
But kama azharot hitzir hakadosh baruch hu Yisrael parasha zo. How many sections are in it? How many prohibitions? The Holy One, blessed be they, cautioned Israel in this portion. Okay, so we start with, if you purchase a Hebrew slave, ki tikneh eved ivri. If a man sells his daughter as a maidservant, ki yimkor ish et bito la'amah. One who strikes his father, they're put to death, by the way. What does this matter have in common with that? What does anything have to do with anything here? Amar lahem hakadosh baruch hu Yisrael. And God says, or again, the holy blessed one be they, says to Israel, Ani kaniti etchem b'Mitzrayim. I acquired you in Mitzrayim, in Egypt. The eser makot sheher eti, with 10 plagues that I showed you. Shene'emar, as it says in Psalms, Niflaim ma'asecha v'nafshi yoda'am. Wonders are your works. I know this well. Kishem sha'atem mitzuvim lo ta'avod ba'achicha yoter mishesh shanim. Just as you are instructed or commanded, don't enslave your brother more than 6 years. Shelo barati et haolam ela l'sheshet yamim. Thus, I created the world only in 6 days. Or there's an equivalence here from the slave working for 6 years and God creating the world in 6 days. For this, atati lecha sheish shanim shetehei rashai la'avod be'eved ivri. So, thus I've given you 6 years that you are permitted to make that Hebrew slave work. Okay, so there's an equivalence here between God's 6 days of creating the world and resting on the 7th day, and 6 days of work, 6 years of work for the slave, and the 7th year going free. Okay, so there's a bunch of people online who are waiting, and then there's one person here who's waiting, 2 people who are waiting. Okay, so 3 people who are waiting.
4.
Only people who have not spoken. Only people who have not spoken. Okay, Jay, you gave up your place later, so I'm going to go back to you. first.
Thank you. Two quick things, starting with the quickest. When the own free will and children, it's a thought I have, I'm happy to develop at some point, which is all children who are immigrants are really refugees. But I can come back to that at some point. But to your point of harm reduction over time, I just want to refer to my brilliant daughter, Sarah, who was a student of Rabbi Dayan's Lo many years ago in Israel. She had as her bat mitzvah portion Behar, with this, where this whole Hebrew non-Hebrew slave is revisited. Time there didn't heal harm reduction, but her interpretation of that issue does. So she took that distinction on, and she said, like a good social worker, which she actually never became, if God would have said to the Israelites, be compassionate to all your slaves, in various ways you treat them, they wouldn't have been able to hear it, not at that point in time. But by making that distinction and saying, start with your neighbors, start with the Israelites, then maybe they could have ultimately had the harm reduction over time that would have healed everybody.
Beautiful. So Jay's raising the question of, or Sarah's raising the question of, like, what do they have the capacity to hear at that moment? Okay. I see Amy and Brenda. Just let me remind people, a lot of people want to speak, so I'm going to invite you to be brief, please.
Shabbat shalom.
Okay, Amy. Shabbat shalom, Amy.
I want to make 4 points. I'll be super brief. Now, first question you might ask is, why the ear?
Amy,
why
can you
did they
choose
put
two, please? Choose two. Choose two.
Two. Okay.
Two.
So the question still is, why the ear? And
Yeah.
we talked about hearing, but also in Leviticus 14:14, the way for purification of guilt is to put blood on the ear. And so this is reminiscent of that. And the other thing is that in 25:55, Leviticus 25:55, it says, I am your master. And if you sell yourself to another master, you're breaking that law, or you're saying, I don't think God's really my master. I'm going to choose a new one. And that's another reason for reminding the person that they have sinned and that they should be resolved of this sin.
Beautiful. Thank you very much. Okay, those are great points of intertextuality. Brenda. Brenda, we can't hear you. Brenda, you have to unmute. You have to unmute.
All right, I find the Parsha just very disturbing. I just don't get all the justifications of it at all. First of all, if we're supposed to be, Hebrews supposed to be God's holy children, his children, then the first law should be, you're no longer slaves of any man, you're mine. And so then maybe you can go on to justify slaves of non-Hebrews, but of course that's also repulsive, but I can understand that given the times. But it should have been a clear statement that Hebrews are no longer slaves, that you have to pay them or something, or give them something in exchange for servitude, which doesn't say anything clearly. The whole idea that they leave without any money, like then what are they're put into destitution? I mean, the whole thing, and giving up your wife and children and having to remain slaves for the rest of your life. I find the whole thing very, very disturbing.
Brenda, you are absolutely right. It is horrific. Horrific. I agree with you. Let's go on. Okay, David, Rob, who else had their hand up? Jesse, did you have your hand up before? Ezra. Did I miss anybody on this side? No. Okay.
It's funny, I'm following Brenda because I have the complete opposite feeling of this. I think sometimes when we get in the weeds, we miss the big picture, which is that throughout the entire known world, what's called the ancient Middle East, Near East, the slavery was the norm. That was the way it was done. So this is actually an amazing parsha of liberation because it gives one hope. But the important thing to me is that these people are being introduced to God. So the story is God's story, and this is their first relationship to Him, and He's giving this idea of compassion and release, and these are the terms of liberation. As you go on to the Parsha more, as you know, it becomes even more compassion. He says, "I am a compassionate God." So this is a beautiful Parsha, and I think it's one that I think the slaves would have been, or the Israelites would have been, it would have been uplifting.
Beautiful. And I just want to note how differently this lands for each of us, right? And it just like, for some of us, it hits us in a really disturbed place, like, oh my God, how could slavery be in the Torah? They were just freed from slavery, and then it's like horrible, and it is. And some of us are really heartened by the compassionate moves.
It's revolutionary.
That this passage implies.
Yeah.
Right, and and we can see it as revolutionary. So those are really contradictory ways of understanding it, and I can definitely make arguments for each of them, but more for this side. Okay.
Here's your $100.
I agree with Brenda.
You agree with Brenda? We're taking sides.
No, from a certain perspective, it's an unmitigated disaster.
It's an unmitigated disaster, Rob.
270 years of slavery.
Yeah.
Okay, signs and wonders, and now we're in the middle of nowhere. And we're listening to stories about like slave and possibilities you're going to be slaves again, but only for 6 years. There's no celebration. There's no party. There's no.
But they had a party already.
Where?
They walked out of the sea singing.
Great. You say
that was the party.
Thank you for
In fact,
yeah.
it says that they despoiled the Egyptians and they put on the clothes that they took for the party clothes. They took from Egyptians and they waltzed out of the desert.
They're in the middle.
They waltzed out of Egypt.
They had quail. No, but they're in the midbar. No, they're in nothingness. They're talked about, now they're talking, first thing they talk about is, by the way, there's a good chance you're going to be slaves again. I mean, what is that? And this is what Jewish history was a complete disaster from there on in. I mean, it's.
Okay, I want to give another example that may or may not help you understand. And Elizabeth, I see your hand. There's a few hands here, and I'm calling you. So, okay, so there's mass incarceration in our world, right? And to me, that's a horrific fact of our world. Mass incarceration, I think it's a continuation of, on some level, slavery in our times. And I find it abhorrent. So, I don't see, given our society, just closing down all the prisons. But I do see that certain laws and procedures and standards could be introduced so that the whole system could be humanized. Maybe. I don't even know. As I'm talking, I'm not even sure I agree with myself. So
That's funny.
But what I'm saying is, like, this is the Torah's attempt to deal with reality as it is. Okay, we're going to go on. Because this is an interesting debate. There's like Brenda and Rob on one hand, and David and some others on the other side. Okay.
I'm going to follow Ezra.
Okay, Ezra.
Yes.
Ezra, Jesse.
I actually agree with Rob, which is, we don't usually agree.
But I like sides are being realigned.
But
new lines are being drawn. This is exciting.
The Torah, it drastically changed the social structure already of the time.
Yeah.
Like, God wasn't like, you can sometimes worship other gods, or you can sometimes eat milk and meat. Like, it was very much, everything was changed. Like, why are we saying that, we can talk about harm reduction all we want, but if we were able to drastically change other things, it seems crazy to me that we don't drastically change.
Okay, so Ezra, what do you think this is doing here in that case? If you're right, some things are just undeniable, unequivocal, you can't do this. So why not this? What do you think? I want you to think about that.
Yeah,
Why not this? Like, what's this doing here?
So I actually want to follow Jay's daughter's Torah. As a social worker, because I'm also a social worker, whether she became one or not, I think it's a really important point that the fundamental principle in social work is you meet a person where they are. And that's sort of the.
So this is like meeting a people where they are.
Yeah, I think so. And that healing is not linear. You know, like you meet a person, you're like, oh, you should be here. But you're not going to get the person here by saying you should be here. You have to be where the person is. And then you're going to have to be patient when the person heals and goes back and heals and goes, you know. So I feel like that is a compassionate God. I mean, obviously, we stay in horrific places, you know, and we stay enslaved in ourselves. And it's, you know, it's unacceptable on one level, but on the other hand, it's just the case, you know. Like you have to get from one place to another, you know.
And I think the challenge of meeting a people, and this also goes back to David's point, like for God or even for ourselves in our lives, it's like, what do you mean I have to meet you where you are? I don't like where you are, and I don't like what you're doing to me, right? So that's a real, I think it's a huge challenge.
Right.
But thank you for naming it.
Right?
There's no other way, because it is.
It just is.
Okay, so Elizabeth, and then Doreen, you spoke already.
So I just want to give a little perspective, although I don't know about the economy of the ancient world. I do know that in ancient Greece in 600 BC, 700 BC, it was a cradle of democracy.
I'm so sorry, we can't hear. Can you please move forward to the mic more, please?
Elizabeth.
Sorry.
Now it's worse. We can't hear it all.
It was a slave society, ancient Greece, and throughout, in fact, the ancient world. And as I understand it, there were many people there. I don't know what the economics were, but many people had nothing. They needed money. They couldn't buy what they needed or exist. They had nothing except themselves. They literally had nothing to pawn, and they would sell themselves into slavery. And my understanding is that this was a pretty common thing, because, you know, at least a third of the people in ancient Athens in the democracy were slaves.
Great, thank you, Elizabeth. That was very helpful. Dorit.
I mean, the reason I agree more with Brenda is what I find troublesome here is that it's put down as law, which is different from harm reduction, which makes it very difficult to change over time. There are many, many examples of laws like that. So.
Okay, but Dorit, what's the law? The law is, it starts when you buy a Hebrew slave. That's not the law. That describes the reality. When you do this, set him free after 6 years. That's the law. The law is not the slavery. It's like set him free. It's like acknowledges when this happens, because it happens. Does that make sense?
So hopefully when becomes never eventually.
Hopefully when becomes never. Exactly. Okay. Asher Chaim online.
Yeah, first,
Chicago.
first that key is not only when, but can be if. But
Nice.
I have a whole, the reason I raised my hand though is I'd like to circle back eventually to the intertexts about blood and doorpost and ear, but perhaps that should wait until after this conversation works out.
No, go ahead. Here you are.
Okay, the intertext. Thank you, Richard. The blood on the doorpost leaving Egypt was the blood of a sacrificial lamb, and its purpose was to avert divine anger. Putting the blood on the doorpost protects the house against that 10th plague. And Amy, thank you for the intertext with Leviticus. The blood on the ear and thumb and big toe of the Kohen who was being inaugurated was blood of a sacrificial bull, and that marked the inauguration consecration. So here we have almost an anti-text, even though it precedes it. It's in the middle. And The sidebar is the difference between animal blood and human blood. And here it's human blood on the doorpost and on the ear. And it seems to be desacralizing the free spirit of the human and invoking divine displeasure rather than averting divine anger. And in this imperfect world, we have a lessening of holiness and a lessening of favor with God through those same images that elsewhere will be elevating and saving. Another sidebar was the fascinating discussion that Rabbi David led on Wednesday evening as the Torah turns, which I recommend to everybody, talking about the Eved who wants to stay because his slave wife and children are staying. And against that, a Rachel Adler essay saying, but wait, if he goes free, he can establish himself and perhaps buy the wife and children's freedom. That part is mind-boggling. I haven't gotten around that yet, but I just thought I'd share my confusion with everybody else. T-Bar.
Interesting. Thank you so much, Asher Chaim. Richard, I'm not going to ask how that landed, but I hope it landed well, and you can tell us in the chat if you want to. Okay, Barbara, and I really want to do
Partially.
one more passage.
If I could make a very brief response, but if not, that's okay.
Okay, quick.
The verb love is used when the slave loves the master.
Yeah.
That also is confusing to me because that may be honest. It may be tainted. It may be honest. And that is also what causes me angst about that passage.
Yes. Yeah, it's very disturbing. I agree. Okay, Barbara. Welcome, Barbara.
Hi, everyone. Shabbat Shalom. Just quickly kind of responding to Osvaldo and some of the other things that were said today. I just finished reading the new books, James by, what's his name? Percival, I can't remember his last name exactly. And what was really fascinating in it, because it's the point of view of the slave Jim in Huckleberry Finn, among other things. And one of the things that is spoken about by the slave when they're coming up, thank you, Percival Everett, thank you. When he's coming up against other slaves as part of this escape and, quote, adventure, is the slaves that like being slaves and want to stay slaves and are, going after slaves who have escaped. And that whole mindset and sort of what Osvaldo said about how things just keep going because that's how people see themselves and that's how it goes and how it really, gets cut through. So I guess I'm coming down on the idea that this is a revolutionary concept and also about how we all get enslaved in one way or another in terms of how we see ourselves and that enslaves us. And so how does this passage give us the chance to look at how to set limits or how to break free of our own enslavement. So I think it's a wonderful metaphor. Thank you.
So if we read on the level of metaphor, it's far less disturbing than reading it as reflecting of actual human experience. Okay, I want to read one more passage with you all. Okay, we have a few minutes. So Exodus 23, 4-12. Caroline, could you screen share? Okay, Asher Chaim, would you like to provide the voice for the text? Exodus 23, 4-12. So this passage really, I think profoundly catches the spirit behind many of these laws, even when they're disturbing, wait, I'm going to read the Ibn Ezra as you find it. Okay, you're looking for Exodus 23, 4-12. Okay, so Ibn Ezra on Exodus, I'm just going to read it in English. There's nothing in the world more difficult for a human being to bear than to be under the control of another person like themselves. Scripture therefore began with the law of the Hebrew servant. Our sages said that the Hebrew servant is an Israelite. So what Ibn Ezra is saying is that the Torah is acknowledging, okay, stop, Carolyn, I'll help you in a minute, stop. The Torah is acknowledging that control over another human being is one of the most seductive and harmful experiences in human nature. And so it starts with that, and starts with a limit on that. As disturbing as that is, and it is disturbing, it's disturbing. This is the Torah, the good, the bad, the ugly, all of life. Okay. Let me see if I can help you.
I think it's page 8.
I don't know if that helps, Caroline. Okay.
Yep, Kitifga.
That's it. Stop. Excellent. Okay, Exodus 23, 4 to 12. Ashachayim, take it away.
All at once or bits and pieces? Tell me when you want me to stop. Kitifga shor oyivcha. Kitifga, when you come across, encounter, confront, shor oyivcha ohomoro to'eh, the ox of your enemy, or his donkey, and they're wandering, hashev teshivenu lo, return it to him. Kitir'eh hamor sona'acha rovetz tahat masa'o. If you see the donkey of your enemy collapsing underneath its burden, v'hadalta me'azov lo, can you restrain yourself from helping him? Azov ta'azov imo, help him with it. Lo tateh mishpat evyoncha berivo, do not pervert the justice of the poor person in his civil case. Midvar sheker tirhaq, stay away from falsehood. V'naqi v'sadiq al taharog kilo asdiq rasha. Those who are blameless and innocent you shall not kill, because I shall not vindicate an evil person. V'shohad lo tiqah, and do not take a bribe. Ki hashohad ya'aver pichim v'salef divrei sadiqim, because a bribe makes the eyes of those who are perceptive go blind and skews the words of the righteous. V'ger lo tilhatz, v'atem yeda'atem et nefesh hager, ki gerim heitem be'eretz Mitzrayim. Do not oppress the foreigner stranger, because you know, recognize, acknowledge the soul of the foreigner stranger. That's what you were in the land of Egypt.
Okay, stop right there. Wait, stop for a second. So this, which is echoed, this sense of knowing that you were a stranger and knowing the feelings of the stranger and the stranger being somehow beloved by God, you know, is echoed in the Torah again and again and again and again, right? There's something about the formation story of the Israelites, you know, through God freeing them, you know, as slaves, which underpins the whole ethical system of the Torah. Remembering that we were slaves, remembering that we were a stranger. And so recognizing those feelings when you see someone else who's disempowered and vulnerable. And how easy is it to forget? How easy is it? Like, you know, I was rushing to shul yesterday and someone stopped me for money and it's like, oh my God, I can't do it. And I didn't have much, but you know, whatever. But it's like, there's so many times where I can't deal with another person's vulnerability, or I think I don't have time, or, you know, I have more important things to do. And then when do we have the capacity to stop and remember that vulnerability that on some level, none of us really want to know, right? Which is, I think, the reason why the whole Torah is built on that premise, because we don't really want to know it. So again and again, remember that you were a stranger in a strange land. One more verse, please.
Vishesh shanim.
No, I'm sorry. 3 more verses.
Vishesh shanim tizra et artzecha v'asafta et tvatah 6 years you shall sow seeds in your land and gather in its produce. V'hashvi'it tishmakenu unetashtah ve'achlu evyonei amecha v'yitron tochal chayat hasadeh. But the 7th year you shall abstain and neglect it. The poor of your people shall eat its produce, and whatever's left over is for the wild animals of the field. Kain ta'aseh lecharmecha lezeitecha. Ditto your olive grove, ditto your wine orchard, and ditto your olive grove. Sheshet yamim ta'aseh ma'asecha uvayom hashvi'i tishbot. 6 days you shall do your work, and on the 7th day you shall rest. Lima'an yanuach shorcha v'hamorecha, in order that your ox and donkey should rest. V'yinafash ben amatcha v'hager, and also there shall be soul restoration for the child of your servant and for the stranger.
So I'm going to end with this thought. So look how we go from remembering that you were a stranger and that you know the soul of the stranger, to this trope of the numbers 6 and 7 applied to the earth, right? And taking care of the earth. And then applied to Shabbat and working for 6 days and then resting, but also the stranger and, you know, everyone within your gates, your animals should rest. And we opened up the Parsha with the institution of indentured servitude, but right away we applied the numbers 6 and 7, and those are the numbers of liberation. Those are the numbers that open up the Torah. 6 days God creates the world, and the 7th day God rested. And when those numbers and those principles are applied to any system of oppression, it means that release is being required. And it also applies to us, right? We live in a crazy society where we never stop working. We are, in a sense, right, slaves to a capitalist society. All right, I know. You could argue with me about that. But apply the numbers 6 and 7 and see what happens to your life. So that's the takeaway from this Parsha. And